Hey, it's TDA, and welcome to episode 18 of this perfect ratio run. And it should come as no surprise for those of you who have been following along that today we are going to be building Orbital Collectors. And yeah, it's a really exciting build. I'm actually building it on Kerbal 2, if you're in the same seat as I am. Why? Because A, we have a lot of room here, and B, this is where, if you saw the last episode, we've been building the builds for the accumulators to charge them up. And of course, we have been preparing for this specific build for a few episodes because we need a few components for that. Specifically, we need the accumulators and we need the interstellar logistics stations in order to be able to build the orbital collectors themselves. Now, of course, you could build everything from scratch as we've been doing with most of these builds, but specifically for this build, because of the ILS having its own build already and that build being quite big, I decided to kind of just request those and use them as a base material, because otherwise the build just becomes even bigger. And despite the fact that 2 of the 4 components are already being built somewhere else, we still need quite a lot of materials in order to get those 50 supermagnetic rings and those 20 thrusters up and running within this build. Now, despite the fact that this is a really big build and it's also a very nice build, it's probably one of my favorite builds in terms of how it turns out. It's very symmetric, very organized. So for those of you who like that, this build is going to be amazing. And the second thing to mention is that this is going to be not a slow build as in how fast we build it, but as you can see, the production speed of orbital collectors is very slow. 1 per 30 seconds as a base speed is really long, considering you need 40 of them to fill up one gas giant completely. So the way I suggest you use this is, if you're in a rush, put multiple of these down and build a lot. That will cost a lot of resources, but you could do that. Alternatively, simply produce a few and place down a few in your gas giants as you are progressing through the game. Depends a little bit on what you're going to use them for. If you're using the gas giants mainly for hydrogen, as I am, fractionators, not fractionators, I meant the fracking stations that we built in the last episode, might be very useful to use instead. They're actually really efficient, really easy to place, and they're pretty damn good at actually making those hydrogen speeds quite high. It's 20 hydrogen per build, so per second per build, of course. So it's a really easy way to get hydrogen, but that's completely up to you. If you're using them, for example, for deuterium, fire, ice, rare resources, basically, then it's very much worth putting down just a few. The speed of orbital collectors in general is very high, and I will actually link to a video where I show you how to place them, because as I said, you can place at most 40 on one gas giant, but you do need to place them correctly in order to fit all of those on one gas giant. Not complicated, just you need to make sure you know what you're doing if you're going to be placing them. Now, as I said, we're going to get the charged accumulators as well as the ILSs from this ILS that's over here, so that we don't have to worry about building those. That does mean we are going to need 3 buildings next to this in order to supply this with all the thrusters it needs. So these are those. And this is already where the nice part about this build starts, because we are going to leave room for 3 belts, and then we are going to be placing exactly 4 more assemblers over here, and those are going to be producing those supermagnetic rings. So again, you do need to work out the ratios for a build like this, because even though it says 50 supermagnetic rings, you only need those every 30 seconds. So and once again, even though we're using Mark III assemblers, I will be using the base speed for the end product, in this case the orbital collector, so I'm just making 1 every 30 seconds. Otherwise, again, your build really blows up. But anyway, that is what I'm doing, but you only need a little more than 1 supermagnetic ring per second in order to get those 50 every 30 seconds. So hence only 4. 4 is plenty though, because that's actually going to require a lot of materials. But speaking of materials, if you look at the materials that we need for the magnetic rings, we need some magnets and some graphite. It's not that interesting, but we need turbines. Interesting thing is, these also need turbines. So the really cool thing about this build is that we get to build turbines once again, as we've been doing quite a lot. but we can use them for 2 different end game items in this case. So yeah, I really like that. Now in terms of how many turbines we need, we are going to need 9 Mark III assemblers full of turbines. That is quite a lot, but that is what we need. And once again, I am rounding the ratios a little bit because of this is a building and we need 1.67 magnetic rings per second, so it doesn't turn out completely perfect in terms of the end result, but that means, especially when we're using Mark III assemblers, I'm rounding it up, so we're slightly overproducing here and there in terms of, we're not overproducing, but we're not using the full capacity of our Mark III assemblers is what I should say. But we should be producing pretty much exactly enough items in order to make those 1 orbital collector every 30 seconds. Anyway, I digress. 9 of these means we need 18 engines, and of course we are going to need a lot of room for that again, so just marking those out. 18 engines, and we're going to be placing those below over here, and that is 18 if I counted correctly. 2 times 9, yes. Trust me, I'm an actuary, I can add 9 and 9, maybe, hopefully. And there we go. So that is a lot of engines. Now we are going to leave another 3 belts of room, and we are going to put in all the magnetic rings that we're going to need for the engines. Again, that's 9 again. So remember, we need iron, cogs, and magnetic rings for that. And we are going to do that. And I am going through this quite quickly because you've seen me build engines and turbines quite a few times now. Specifically, this build though is going to be again slightly different from the previous builds. Why? Because you get to do a lot of fun stuff with belts. I'm actually going to show you one trick with belts that you probably already know, but in case you don't, it's very useful to make pretty belts. So that will come up in a second. But we need cogs, and we need 9 of those again as well. How symmetric is this? How organized is this? Don't you just love that? But now let's talk about belts. So let's take these out because we don't need those. And remember, the outgoing belt, this is going to be the outgoing belt for the turbines themselves. So those are going to be on that side. Now what we actually need to do is we need to bring in the engines, and we are going to do that like this. We're going to start somewhere over here. We are going to wrap those around like this. And then we are going to bring them all the way in the back over here, like so. Now, these engines are going to be offloaded on the belt over here. On this side, that is. And then these engines are going to be offloaded on this belt on the other side, which leaves room in the middle for the 3 items that we need to produce. Like this. I can almost hear you shouting, TDA, you're making the same mistake again. If you have 3 items that you're going to be using on these belts, you'll run into issues with sorters. You've made that mistake before. Don't make it again. Why are you doing this? Don't worry, don't worry, don't worry. Why? Because we are going to do this. You see these nice little belts over here. What we're going to do is this. We're going to wrap those around, and this is going to go up here. Maybe not all the way out there actually, but up there. And there we go. So this is going to wrap around, so the engines on this side can get the magnetic belts on this side, so they don't actually need to reach all the way up there. And then these engines can grab them off this belt. So we don't have those 6 sorters on this side, we actually only have 5, and that is an amount that we can actually fit on there. So that's going to be just fine. And we're actually going to take this 1 step further, because this is going to wrap all around once again, go up here, and also be over here, because of course these also need the magnetic coils. So, and we are actually producing almost a full belt of magnetic coils that is being used in all these 27 assemblers over here. So that is, at least I think that is just really cool. And it's a little bit of a different take on the build that we've been doing so far with the engines. Now we also need the cogs, and again they need to come up over here And similarly, we're going to wrap them out around like that. So rather than kind of a horizontal build where we used to put all of these different assemblers in a row, we are actually having a more vertical build or more square build, whatever you want to call it, where we're organizing it like this. Now, that does mean that we need to bring in quite a few items. First of all, we are going to need to bring in some copper, which is going to be on this belt. And we are also going to bring in some, and I'm going to do that like this, I believe. We are going to bring in some magnets. Now the magnets in terms of space are going to come from the other side. And as you can see, we are going to need a little belt hop over here. And I am going to make that a little belt hop. And I'm not sure if I've showed this before. So what you can actually do is you can start out like this. Or start out like this. So you start out one square away from where the belt is you want to cross. Press shift in order to make sure the belt actually goes up. Then you delete most of this belt. Just a little hop upwards. So this is like only a quarter hop up, and then you connect it to the already existing belt on the other side. That is important, because if you would do it, for example, like this, you have a belt over here, and then you do something like this, even if it's like this, then you can't make this smaller hop. It will always make a larger hop. As you can see, it's not exactly in the middle, and it is over here. So if you do it like that, you're going to run into issues. So this is how you make the tiniest little bridge that you can. Looks quite neat, kind of cute. And that allows you to bring in the stuff from the other side without wasting too much space. And of course, I forgot to mark up this belt. This is going to be the cogs. There we go. Okay, so now let's talk about some basics. We are going to need some graphite. Remember, graphite. As well as we are going to need some magnets, and we're actually going to bring in the magnets from the other side. As you can see, we are going to make them over here. We won't have enough space to do it over here, so that is how we are going to do that. At least we're going to, no, actually no, we are going to build them on this side, but slightly different than what I just said. Anyway, just before I confuse you even further, let me build this. So we are going to need some smelters. And this actually also turns out pretty nicely. We are going to need 4 smelters with graphite. And we are going to need 2 smelters of copper over here. And that is of course nowhere near enough in order to completely satisfy the copper demand for our magnetic coils, but bear with me for a moment. The copper is going to go on this belt. But then we are going to bring in the coal from over here. And then, so this is going to be, let me align a little bit with this. This is going to be the coal. Oh, this is going to be the coal. Marked up the wrong one, apologies. This is going to be the magnets. And then this is going to be the graphite. There we go. I actually could kind of line up 1-to-1 the graphite with the supermagnetic rings, because you need 4 for these 4 assemblers, but that doesn't really align nicely with everything else that we're building after that, so that's why I chose to do it like this. Why? Because we actually need 12 more of these, and because we built them, these smelters like we've built them right now, that allows us to do this. We're also going to need a splitter over here in order to make sure we have some ore on that side and some ore on that side, and that allows us to bring the ore from down here. So this will be ore, and this will be supplying these smelters on top here, as well as these smelters on the bottom row potentially, although of course they can also draw their ore from this belt simply like that. And that means that we can have an under outgoing belt with copper over here, and that then should supply us with also copper, enough to keep all of these satisfied. Now, of course, they also need some magnets, and apologies for the confusion I might have just created, but what I meant was We are making the most of our magnets on the other side, but we actually have more than a full belt of magnets in the entire build together, because these magnets, the magnetic coils, are very, very magnet hungry. So they're almost taking a full belt of magnets. So that means in order to also supply the supermagnetic rings, we need a second place where we're producing those, and that is going to be over here. So we do need to make sure we supply the ore from somewhere. So we're going to need a belt to do just that. And of course, then this can go down here. And then this is, let's do that the correct way around, of course. That needs to be something like this. There we go. And then we have a belt that goes all the way around here, up here. Can remove that one. And then we have the outgoing magnets over there. This is again the ore, and this is going to be the magnets. Now, of course, that also means that we need some iron ore over here, because of course otherwise we won't be able to make the magnets. So that means one more belt over here. And then these belts are actually going to draw from all the way on the other side, where we are going to be producing that stuff. So that means that we are going to have one belt, something like this. We might need to fine tune that in a moment, but it should work just fine, I believe. And another belt like that for incoming materials. And we also, of course, need iron, because we need to make the cogs from iron. So that means that we are going to have another belt over here with the iron. And then, of course, this is the copper ore, and this is the iron ore. There we go. Okay, we are almost halfway done already. It's pretty quick. It's not a small build, but it's a pretty straightforward build with not too many different complex items. So we are going quite fast through this build. Now, what else do we need? Well, we are going to need some, well, not some, we're going to need quite a lot of different smelters. And specifically, I need to just make sure we are measuring this out correctly in order to make sure everything fits where it actually needs to go. I do believe, however, that this is correct, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, actually, no, not completely. We do want to kind of move this a little bit to the side. We don't necessarily need to do this, by the way, but it's just all a little bit more nicely organized if you do. So just repeating a little trick again over here. There we go, and down. And that means that this belt that's now going up can be like this. Now, why am I fiddling around with that a little bit? Because I want to align my smelters really nicely. Specifically, I want to align the smelters with my rows of assemblers. And we are going to need a lot, and I do mean a lot of smelters. Specifically, we are going to need a lot of magnet smelters. It is 15. And we are going to need 6 more on top of that. This is all going to be magnets. And that's about half of what we actually need. So 15, and then 6 more. There we go. Then, aligned with this row of assemblers, we are going to be putting in another row of 21 smelters to be exact. However, not all of that is actually going to be magnets, because we are going to be using a few of those to make iron instead. 7 on this row to be exact. Then we are going to be putting in some belts. 1, 2, something like this. Something like that. And then we are going to be putting in another row, which is then nicely aligned with this row of assemblers. Now, in hindsight, I didn't do that the smartest way around, because this is actually all going to be iron. Icarus got stuck there for a moment. Okay. And this is also going to be iron. Which, again, is not actually all the iron we need, because we are going to need a little bit more iron than that. Specifically, we are going to be putting in... Just measuring out the belts once again. We are going to be putting in 3, 6, 8 more smelters that are producing iron. And then the rest of this room we are going to use for steel, because we do need a lot of steel. Specifically, like I said, we need 10 of those, which nicely aligns like that. So this is all going to be iron smelters and copper smelters and... Sorry, iron smelters, steel smelters I meant. Which means we are still missing a lot of smelters on the bottom, because we need even more iron. And of course, since we're aligning everything nicely with our assemblers, this is going to be over here. This is actually not going to be those, but this is going to be mainly iron. But again, not entirely, because we are going to need 7 more magnet smelters over here. Now, you might be wondering, why am I alternating these iron smelters and magnet smelters? Well, for several reasons. Because we need so much iron that we can't actually all put it on one belt. And if you balance it like this, when you are going to be placing down the input belts, and by input belts I mean of course the ore, this is going to turn out in such a way that it's actually going to be supplying almost exactly one full belt per row, or double row I should say in this case, of smelters. And it's going to be completely full or almost full in most of these cases, so that's actually really nice. We can connect the magnets to this belt from this side, from that belt to, from this side to that belt as well. And then of course we have more magnets over here that we can then supply like this, and that should work out just fine. That also means that we can bring in the ore from over on this side, down here. And even though the distance looks really big, both of these should be able to reach that. This bottom row will be feeding in from this row on the bottom over here. That should be enough, because we're not using that much. As you can see, we also have the magnet smelters over here, but it's only 5. They're not going to be using that much of the belt. And then this row is going to be more than easy to also feed off on the same belt. So the top belt is going to be supplying these 2 rows. So to mark that up, because that is a little bit easier to grasp, visualize, this is going to be the magnets, this is going to be the ore, this is going to be more magnets, and this is going to be the copper ore that we also had to put in there, and then this is going to be the iron ore. Now, that means that in order to supply those little smelters over here, so the assemblers over here for the cogs with iron, we can simply put in a belt like this. And of course I did count it out so that the amount of iron smelters here is exactly enough to supply all of these cog assemblers. So that should work out just fine, because we of course are trying to keep the ratios as perfect as we can with a building built. And then last but not least, we have a huge belt here that is going to be iron. That will then feed into this over here, and that by itself will not be enough. So we also need to bring in some iron on this belt, which we can do something like this. And then of course we do need to make sure everything is able to actually get some resources. So what we are going to do is we are going to have to put in another belt with ore, which is going to be this one. And then that is going to be, let's mark that up before we forget. So there, there, and there. And yeah, so let's see. We are outputting on this belt, so the steel production can actually grab it from this belt as well. And part of that is going to be overflow for the steel production, but that's going to go straight into the iron production that is needed here for the engines. So it should work out again perfectly fine. And that also means that what we can do is put a belt over here like so. And we will draw that all like this. Why? Well, we haven't really bothered about these yet, but these also need titanium alloy. So these thrusters need the titanium alloy. So in order to produce that, we're going to have to put in some smelters. And we are going to be putting in those smelters on the top over here. We are going to need 10 of those. And we nicely align that with everything else. Doesn't need to come that close because we don't need the entire space. But of course, the alloy is quite hungry in terms of steel and titanium. And that will allow us to put a belt over here on the top, I believe, is probably the most logical location to do it like this. We will have the steel down here, as we already put that in. So then this is going to be the alloy. Which means that we also need the titanium, and we are going to be putting in the titanium on this belt down here. Which leaves the acid, which we are going to be... Oh, we actually might want to switch that around. Doesn't really matter. For now, let's just put it over here. So this is going to be the sulfuric acid. As you can see, we need titanium, we need steel, and we need sulfuric acid. And we have everything that we need now on this belt. We're not actually producing acid or titanium yet at the moment. So that is, of course, what we're going to be doing over here. We are going to need 7 of those. And those being titanium smelters over there, which are going to be outputting on this belt. And we have the steel over on this belt. Now, that means that we also need to grab the raw materials from somewhere. And that is going to come over from this direction. Now we're running low on belts, so what I actually did on this planet as well, I used my Polar XL hub that I showed you in one of the previous episodes, so that allows me to easily grab materials, and you see they're instantly being replenished because we have quite a lot of overproduction for that. And there we go. So then we have that fixed. Now we do need the acid as well. Acid luckily is quite straightforward, and we have a lot of room here. So what we're going to do is we are going to make sure we are leaving room for 2 input belts. Like this. And then we are going to grab some of these. Doesn't really matter exactly where you put them, but you are going to need 10 of these, so that's 5. And then we need another 5. Like this. We are going to have to put the outgoing belts something like this. And let's bring those down. There we go, like that. And of course, acid needs quite a few inputs, 3 of them to be exact. And that means we only have 2 incoming belts at the moment to supply them with that, so the 3rd belt is going to go on this side. Now we do need to be a little bit tricky with our ILSs, because we are going to have to place a few of them to make sure we have enough room for the materials. And especially if you want to put them in a strategic location, so to speak. And what we are going to end up needing to do is to make sure that we are optimizing the location of that in order to not run into issues with the spacing. So what we're going to try to do is put them like that. And as you can hopefully kind of see through the building, maybe I should flip it around, it's easier to see. We are going to put them kind of in the middle between 2 different chemical stations in such a way that hopefully, if I space those correctly, so we might need to move this up with 1 space. Yes, I think we No, we should be fine. We should be fine, I think. So let me show you what I mean. What we're going to do is we are going to need to have a couple of belts with inputs. Now, let's remove those for a second. This is going to be one input belt going in that direction. And then we have the same item going out in this direction. We're going to have one go down here. That's the second belt. And then we're going to have the third item go down here. Wrap around like that. And that also means, of course, that we need the second belt of inputs over here on this side, which leaves more space to do this. And then that's going to be our titanium ore belt. And that means that we are then requesting 4 items here: the titanium, the water, the stone, and then of course the oil, which is the 3 items that we need for the acid as well as for the titanium smelters, which again leaves room to also request the warpers. Yeah, it doesn't really matter at this point how you exactly output the different items on this belt. Generally speaking, of course, you want to have the stone closest and then the water and the oil on the other sides sort of close to the thing as well. But at this point, your sorter should be so fast that it doesn't really matter exactly where you place them. This is the outgoing belt, and then this is the oil belt over here. There we go. And same thing on the other side, of course. We do like to kind of keep this nicely aligned. So this is going to be the, what did I place there? Water. Which means that the top one is going to be the stone. And then this one should be the oil that wraps around. That sorts that part of the build. Last but not least, we also need to make sure we input the different connections for the mostly the iron ore at this point. Now, of course, we do need to make sure we're actually supplying enough, so this needs to be on different belts. So this is going to be one outgoing belt for this. We are going to have to go down with a belt like this with iron ore as well. Then we have another belt going down and around like this, which is going to be the copper. And then we have another belt with iron ore going around like that. And this is where you can see how iron hungry this build is going to be, because we need almost 3 full belts of iron just to make those supermagnetic rings, and that is a lot, of course. There we go. Okay, now that kind of wraps up this build already. It's like I said, it's quite straightforward, but it's also quite symmetric and nice. Symmetric and nice, not symmetric. And yeah, just look at it. It's so nice and organized. But we are lacking, of course, a lot of sorters, power poles, and we need to wrap up the foundation. So be right back while I do that. And we're all done. That was about 400 sorters, I believe, and probably around 100 power poles, but it's all connected and hooked up. With one exception, we actually haven't hooked it up yet to the power, and by popular request, we are going to do that together. Kind of cool to see everything starting to work. As you can see, we should have everything on the belts now. And yeah, everything should be working now. It takes a little while for the later parts of the build to start really to gear up. That has a very simple reason, because of the earlier materials needing to be produced first. So it takes a little while for the belt to get really saturated. But you can see, for example, the engines now slowly starting to back up. So even the later builds get there. In this case, magnetic coils. This one should start working any moment now. And yeah, there we go, I think. Yeah, and you can see them kind of going in and out in terms of how fast they're producing. Same for the turbines over here. Takes a little while for the belt to get saturated, but as you can see, the engines are now fully working. The turbines are almost fully working. These two, I think, will be kind of tagging in and out, but as the belt gets further saturated, that should work out as well. Same thing for the alloy here. You can see the first ones are already working at top speed, but it takes a little while for all the acid to really penetrate the entire belt, but that should work itself out, no problem. And yeah, I think we will see this last one working already now. Last one, at least in this row. You can see slowly it will start penetrating the rest of the belt, and then basically we will have our entire production up and running. Now, why is this not working? That's because this is actually not supplying the coal, so that helps. Yeah, so there we go. We have the coal up and running here, now making the graphite, and that should take care of that. This belt actually doesn't need to be this long. There we go. And yeah, that means we also have the supermagnetic coils coming in. We have the production of copper working pretty well over here. You can see that all the copper is actually being used. There's no residual copper on the belt. Again, that's the perfect ratios doing their job. Now, of course, you could get in a position at some point where the belt is actually saturated. So, for example, you see that happening here with the magnets. That's because it took a little while for the copper to really start producing, and the magnets just work faster than that because we have a larger supply of magnets. So it's things like that that you can see the same happening now with the copper. That will happen because if there's any component in the build that takes a little bit longer to saturate, then everything else will start backing up. It doesn't mean that the ratios are not perfect. That just takes a little while for the belt to actually sort each other out. But you will not be wasting too much production like that, because again, it will sort itself out. For example, with the alloy, you can see now that they are almost all already working, and even the last one just started working. So again, that will sort itself out, but because these were not working at top speed, the turbines, which were already working at top speed, are now a little bit backed up, but that will balance each other out, and at some point you will pretty much see this belt almost moving non-stop, because everything else has been working at top speed for a little while as well. Okay, that concludes this build for today. I hope you enjoyed that, and remember, patience is key with this because this will be producing very, very slowly. And of course, it also helps if you actually put an incoming belt for your coils. That will make it at least go slightly faster than 0. As you can see, there was already a lot on that belt. We actually have a little bit of power issues. That has everything to do with the fact that we are currently trying to charge up 4 ILSs at the same time, on top of the whole factory working, so that will also sort itself out. And remember guys, only 1 week to go until the next patch, where we get proliferators, whatever those are. We are getting advanced mining machines. Hopefully those will be really cool and really handy as well. And of course, I really hope that does not break this save game, because that will allow us to basically continue this playthrough. And of course, I will be making builds for those things as well, and probably with a slightly higher priority. Because at the point of the game we are in now, I think they will actually be really useful. So look out for that, and I will catch you in the next one.